Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 3 of Management 401. Hopefully, you've been finding the class enjoyable so far. We've had a lot of good topics we've talked about, some great discussion boards, and I think this week we will keep that going as we're going to dive into teamwork and a couple of other aspects. So, to start the video off, I just want to go over what is due for the week. I am here on the home page, as always, and you can scroll down. And as I mentioned, we are on week 3 now. So, here's a list of everything that is due. You're going to have your discussion, lecture response, assignment, and then your self-evaluation. So for your lecture, again, just watch this video, write up your summary of at least 150 words or so. And one thing that I want to encourage you that I have seen where some students have been lacking in the past is talk about the discussion and things that you have learned from it, maybe things that, or maybe situations where you have applied things that we've talked about, or situations where you can apply it or something. We need to see that you're watching the lecture and getting something from it. I've seen a couple of situations where it looks like students are just copying and pasting stuff from the books, which isn't the point of these lectures. And if that's the case, you may be docked points. So just be sure to talk about what you're learning in the lecture here. For our discussion question this week, let's open that up and talk about that for a minute. We are going to talk about teamwork. So I am a huge proponent of teams. I think teams are great, but only in the right situation. Not every job requires a team. So I am an auditor for the Department of Defense, and I was trying to think of a couple of examples, and I thought of some different audits that we do. So we have one audit that we do is just at the end of a contract. A contractor wants to submit their final billing. Basically, we go in, we verify a few costs, make sure that they're not overbilling the government, and then we kick it out. It's a 30, 40-hour job is all. It's not anything that takes us real long. That is something that only one person needs to work on. We don't need to throw 3 or 4 people at it, because then it's just going to be cumbersome. People are going to be tripping over each other, and that 30 or 40-hour work budget is going to balloon to 60 or 70 because people are going to be confused and not knowing what's going on. However, we have another audit where we audit what's called a proposal. So somebody wants to sell something to the government. They say, hey, here's how much it's going to cost us. And we've got one of those going on right now. And those audits are huge and very, very time consuming. We have to go in and look at labor costs, material costs, subcontractor costs, overhead costs. We generally get around 90 days to do those. The one we're working on now takes 60 days, or we only have 60 days. It's really hard to do that in 90 days, let alone 60. So we break that up into teams. We're going to have one person look at the labor, one look at the materials, one look at the overhead, and so on, one guy that's managing it. So teamwork comes together in that, and that's going to help us meet that deadline. Nobody could handle that audit on themselves and realistically get it done and do a good job. So you can see where teamwork really plays a role, and it has a situation. Sorry about my throat. I'm just getting a little bit of a cold here. So, as I mentioned, teamwork can be great. You just want to make sure that you have the right situation. So, we talked about the discussion, the lecture response. Your assignment here, we'll pull that up, and then your self-evaluation with your assignment. It's going to be on the leadership case problem A on pages 272 and 273, as it says right here. One thing that I want to remind you, a couple people have seen this and just not scrolled all the way down to see that you need to put that in APA formatting. So please be sure to put that in APA format. Look at that if you have any questions. There's a template right there. This template is awesome. It'll walk you through it. It'll kind of show you what you need to do. But if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to answer them. The last one, you'll have a couple of self-evaluations here. So on page 213 and 286, rating a manager's power and team player attributes. I think you'll really like both of these. And then, so what you'll do, just like in the last couple of weeks, go through, take the quiz, and analyze your results. And answer those 3 questions. This also needs to be in APA formatting. So please be sure to do both of those using APA. Now, I want to get into the chapters we're going to be talking about for the last 10 minutes. So as you can see, there are chapters 7, 8, and 9. So let's talk a little bit about chapter 7. So chapter 7 deals with power, politics, and leadership. So basically, what we're getting into here, as it shows in the chapter outline, is types of power. That's what it's going to become. That's what you're going to start out with. You know, how do you get your power? Are you going to use it for good or bad? How you can become an empowering leader, so a good leader. Factors that will really dig into you being a good leader. So what is power? Power, another word that's synonymous with that is authority. Your power has to be legitimate. You need to actually have the ability to delegate something. But there are different positions that can go along with that. You can have your legitimate power, you can have a reward power, you can have a coercive power. I'm sure everybody's had that boss that they have just really disliked because they were manipulative or different things. There's different ways that you can get to that power. You can be an expert on something. You can be referring, you can be prestige, and then you can have power stemming from ownership. If you own the company, you obviously have power. You have dependencies, capitalizing on opportunity. The first entry into the market, somebody might have power on that. Managing critical problems, being close to power. So if you've got, you know, the son of the owner or the daughter of the owner that gets into power because they're close to power, maybe that's something that you could be seeing as that, or self-serving behavior. So there's a lot of different things that can go along with power. And a couple of things that I wanted to hit on quick while we were talking about this is tactics for becoming an empowering leader. So I don't think anybody has, well, I shouldn't say that, but I think most people have the desire to be an empowering leader, to be a good leader. So what are some of the things that make up a good leader? You want to foster initiative and responsibility, as it says right here. And it goes through and it gives you a list of things that you can do to be an empowering leader. So the good leaders that I have seen hit on all of these things here. But a couple of the ones that I think that are very important, encouraging self-leadership. They're out there, they're leading our team, they're doing the things that we need to, but they're also teaching us how to not only lead ourselves, but preparing us to be leaders down the road as well. So you have to learn to lead yourself before you can lead a group, but you can do those, kind of one right after each other, almost at the same time. If I can lead myself to do something, I can possibly teach somebody else to do that. So it's kind of the next step. They're always continuing to lead. So I think a good leader knows how to delegate, and we'll get into that here in just a second. But they might be able to say, okay, here's your job. You need to go and do this. That doesn't mean that they're just going to wash their hands and walk away and say, man, good luck, hope you get it done. They're going to follow up and make sure that you're doing that. They're going to continue to lead. They're not going to necessarily micromanage, but they're going to be there just to follow up and be a resource for you. And then a key one, as I mentioned, is kind of delegation, which we hit on a little bit here with continuing to lead. So the top one here where it says assigning formal authority and responsibility for accomplishing a specific task to another person. Again, as I mentioned, that's delegating a task and giving them the authority to do that, but also giving them some instruction. That is a huge thing for a leader to do, to be able to trust somebody to do that, but it empowers that person as well. It also, as the third bullet says there, it's going to give those group members a chance to develop their skills. They're not going to get micromanaged. They're going to trust them that they're going to be able to get that done and that they're going to be competent to get it done. So without delegation, effective leadership is not going to happen. You can't micromanage everything. You've got to be able to have a good team, and sometimes that can be a little hard. I've worked on teams before where there's been somebody that maybe hasn't pulled their weight in the past, so you're a little hesitant. Sometimes that takes, I guess, a leap of faith to give them another chance. Yes, you might have to watch them a little bit closer, but at some point you've got your own job to do, so you need to rely on them that they'll be able to get their things done as well. So as you're going through on Chapter 8, you'll be reading about all of those different topics, and then hopefully you'll be able to get some good information out of that. Let's move on to out of Chapter 7. Let's move on to Chapter 8 here. So influencing tactics of leadership. So now that you are a leader, how are you going to influence people? So as I mentioned here in the chapter outline, you're going to look at some ethical and honest tactics, some neutral tactics, and then dishonest and unethical tactics. And again, that goes back to my comment about having that boss that was manipulative or did things that you thought were unethical to get people to work. Nobody necessarily likes that person. So we'll hit on that a little bit. So understanding the role of influence and power. In the last chapter, we talked a little bit about how you have to have legitimate power. You have to be in that position. Once you're in that position, you'll be able to influence people. So these kind of play off of each other. So influence is your ability to affect the behavior of others. So if I were to come to you as your teacher and say, here's what you need to do for this, I am in a position of leadership that you would probably go along with that. It's the same at your job, probably no matter what it is. If you work at a fast food restaurant and the shift manager comes to you and says, "Hey, I need you to cook hamburgers instead of working the till," you'll be able to do that. Or if you are working at a hospital and the head nurse comes to you and says, "I need you to work on this floor instead of that floor," they have that position of power, so they have the capacity to influence somebody. But that influence needs to be used correctly. So once you're influencing them, once you have the power, you can do that. The influence is to send them in the particular direction that you've been talking about or that you need them to work on. So I want to hit on the 3 tactics that I mentioned up front. So you got 3 tactics, and the first one is ethical and honest. I think the majority of people have ethical and honest intentions. So they want to make sure that you're getting things done correctly. The next one is kind of a gray area where it's neutral. I can't think of a lot of examples that fall into that. But then at the bottom you have the manipulative ones, where you have the boss saying, "Well, if you want to get this time off for this Friday, you've got to get all of this done, not only your stuff but my stuff." Maybe they're trying to manipulate you to get something done that you normally wouldn't do. So those are some of the examples that you're going to see with that. And then another one here is influence tactics. So good leaders lead by example. They are going to make a personal appeal. They're going to show people, "Hey, this is how it can benefit you and us," type of things, not in a manipulative way, but to show them the end goal, to show them how they are going to impact the company. So I think that those are some great tactics that people can use. They're also a team player. They're hands-on. They're not just going to sit back and coast. Now let's talk more about Chapter 9 here for a few minutes. So this is developing teamwork. Hopefully this will help you answer the discussion question a little bit too. So on this one here, you'll see the leader actions can foster teamwork. So a good leader is going to help you create a good and an effective team. So you've got a team and you've got teamwork. Those are 2 very different things. I can throw 5 people together and make a team. That does not mean I'm going to have teamwork. In order to have teamwork, you need to have a team that's going to trust each other and work together. And I think this describes it really well. It says they're going to work with an understanding and commitment to group goals on part of all team members. So you have like a team cohesion. Everybody is working together for that end goal. And that is something that if you don't have that in the team, it is not going to be very effective. If you don't have that, you're basically going to have what they call on the right-hand side here a group. So groups, they don't have a strong commitment. They work independently. They kind of lack focus, I guess, basically. So they might not necessarily see that end goal. They're more likely, I think one of the key things here that you'll see in an ineffective team is they're likely to discuss with and divide and delegate, not necessarily work together. If you have a true team, you might have team player 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's say 2 falls behind, but 3 is ahead. Maybe 3 can catch up because 2 ran into some problems. That teamwork is really going to be digging into that aspect of it. And that's right, why it says here on the top bullet, characterized by a common commitment. I think that is key. You have the end goal. Earlier I talked a little bit about that big audit that we're doing where we're auditing the materials and labor and everything. Some of those sections are harder than the other ones. So if the easier section gets done, maybe they can jump off and help the harder section because we have that end goal. We know what we need to do. We need to get it done quickly and correctly so we get a good product out there in that 60-day turnaround. So we have that collective work products. We share leadership roles. Everybody owns their own sections of the audit and they'll kind of report to somebody at the top, but that doesn't mean that we don't bounce ideas off of each other, that we don't work together. That is very, very important. And then down here, they discuss, decide, and do real work together. I think that is so key. A good team is going to have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, depending on the length of the project, whatever it is, to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And then right here, you're going to have team-based organizations. So here's some key characteristics of a team-based leader. They build trust, they inspire teammates, they are going to coach the members towards higher levels. An effective leader is always going to get the person that they are managing to rise up a little bit, to maybe do a little bit better. So that's what we've got for this week. So if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the discussion boards.